Yeah, I wore my Dark Shadows shirt all last week in honor of Joel Crothers leaving Santa Barbara. And I realized that the one person who's not on here is Joe Haskell, who Joel Crothers played. There is Burke Devlin on here, but not the right Burke Devlin. So,
Forgive me, Your Honor. Table made me do it.
welcome
Hello.
to week 59 of Misha Dianne West, Santa Barbara. Today is Monday, September 9th, 1985. So, turned in my calculus homework.
Good.
Don't think it went that well. It's not. See, when the teacher writes the stuff on the board, it all makes sense. But then when you get the homework, it doesn't make any sense. And this teacher had this interesting habit of using different variables every day. So, let's say a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, tomorrow he might write alpha squared plus gamma squared equals omega squared. And then the next day, completely different set of variables. So it was very hard to memorize anything. So let's just say Calculus 3 is not going well week 1 into it. Then when I got home from college, my dad told me that my grandfather had died. So September 9th, 1985 was not a great day.
And were you able to cheer up by watching an episode of Santa Barbara?
Well, I would have listened to my audio tape of it. So can't say I remembered any of this as we were watching it. So probably wasn't too focused on it. Episode 286, Gina encounters Augusta at the Orient Express, and they have some amusing back and forth swipes at each other. Augusta says she heard Gina was being kicked out of her house. Gina says that Cece changed his mind and didn't sign the divorce papers. So this is what she's spreading around town now to help ground herself as the lady of the house at the Capwell Mansion. Gina responds to Augusta's little dig by saying, "It must be hard for you to have a husband who makes appointments with other women. I hear he has a roving eye." Because Augusta has been told by Gina that she's meeting Lionel there, which is interesting because I thought he said Mason was going to meet
Yeah,
her there,
I think that was, and I think we talked about it actually in the last podcast, how this was a rather convoluted bit of reasoning that Lionel would be phoning on behalf of Mason, and they seem to have dropped that completely now.
Then Augusta says it must be hard to live at the Capwell Mansion when you know no one likes you. And then Gina tries to prove, being at the Orient Express, that the Capwells like her by whistling at Ted and Eden, who happen to be there. And Eden comes over, because she is, of course, running a restaurant. And Gina orders a double lime, and Eden says, "We don't serve that. Perhaps another restaurant."
It makes it very clear that she is not okay with Gina. So.
Eden does not like Gina at this point. Gina phones home and finds out that Lionel is there. Because, of course, Santana and Lionel had schemed to get Gina out of the house. Augusta then discusses with Julia the possibility of having Brandon taken away from Gina and given to Santana. And Julia does talk a little bit about, well, if Santana never signed her rights away, but she probably did. And then Augusta says, we could forge something. And then Julia says, okay, I'm out. Of course, over at the Capwell house, Lionel meets Brandon. And he teaches him some games, one of which is to look at a person for 5 seconds and then try to remember everything you can about how they look and what they're wearing. Later, when Augusta shows up, Lionel tries the same thing with Brandon, and after 5 seconds, he asks Brandon to describe Augusta's attributes, and Brandon starts with, well, she has wrinkles, and Augusta stops him immediately. So, Augusta, I don't think, is going to warm to Brandon as Lionel has, because she didn't seem to like him to start with, I thought. Called him a toad, and then every encounter they have just doesn't seem to endear him to her. Lionel then tries to bond with Rosa over Brandon. She's a little bit, cautious about it, but then Lionel says that if you ever decide that Gina is not a good mother, they should call him. So he's actually on board with the thought of taking Brandon away from Gina should she do anything drastically bad. Augusta then asks Santana if she'd like to leave town with Brandon. And I think she's implying she would, pay her if she needed money to take Brandon away. And then Gina barges in, of course, angry that she's been tricked. And she actually spends quite a long time looking for Lionel and Brandon and can't find them. But eventually she's angry with Lionel. But Lionel quickly diffuses it by saying that he discovered one thing today, that Brandon loves her very much. And immediately Gina turns around and feels she's found an ally, in any potential fight to keep Brandon.
And here we see Lionel, the master salesman.
And then later Gina tells Rosa that Lionel is to be allowed to visit whenever he wants. So this in the context of Gina telling the rest of the family that she's, going to be taking over the household. She will be implementing any restrictions that she wants. So I don't know if the threat is there to kick Eden and Ted out, but I think she's only one step away from that if they don't behave. So.
Well, yeah, I think she's looking for a certain kind of demonstration of loyalty or, recognition. And it seems like if she doesn't get it or is concerned she won't get it, she always seems to have a plan B. So like with Mason, she's got these papers that she can hold above him if necessary. And I think she's kind of now looking for something like that she can hold over everyone. Each person.
Later at home, Augusta tells Lionel that she's scared. She can't quite enunciate what scares her, but I guess the whole thing. Obviously, Sophia is mentioned many times, even though clearly Lionel has no interest in Sophia at this point. Felicia Dalton continues to interrogate Christy, gets her to tell her whole story, and is very combative throughout. She's quiet towards the end of it, and you're not quite sure where she's going, but after Christy leaves, she tells Cruz that she thinks Christy and Ted are both lying.
Yeah.
And then Christy and Ted meet at the Orient Express, and Christy says she blew it, and Ted suggests maybe reverting to the truth. Christy says, what am I going to tell the judge? The table made me do it? She doesn't feel like the truth is very believable. Julia joins them, but we actually don't hear Julia and Christy talk, really, because the camera follows Ted as he goes to talk to Eden. And Eden asks Ted if he's told the truth, and, kind of dances around a bit, but in the end says that he did tell the truth. And Eden says, that'll be the end of it. But really, she didn't quite believe him, and later she tells Cruz basically that. But Eden sort of says to Cruz, but, I need you to drop this, because I love you. And Cruz is like, this is a repeat of when I arrested your mother. Eden tells Rosa that Cece is being moved home. And Gina says that she won't be able to sleep in the master bedroom with all the nurses and equipment in there, so she'll need to take over another bedroom. And Eden says, I don't care what you do, and then says, oh, wait a minute, why don't you take one at the far end of the hall? That way you can sneak in and see Mason at night.
Which is interesting because it implies that Mason will in fact be back at the Capwell home.
Yeah, and I guess with Cece unconscious, maybe Eden's assuming that he'll just move right back and no one can say anything, especially with Gina, on board with that. So, yeah, we still haven't seen Mason after a few days.
No,
so maybe he had like a week off or something. But
Yeah.
I imagine he will be moving back in. And Sally's apartment will just be empty for a while unless
Oh, we don't
Kelly
know.
moves back there. Maybe,
It's always there for whoever has the next fight. I'm sure Gina will send a few people packing. They may as well have somewhere to go.
And that is it for a Monday episode.
I just, two things I wanted to note. First of all, I'm always sort of interested / perplexed by Rosa's character, and it's not to say she's inconsistent. She actually is quite consistent, but she doesn't seem to ever be very sympathetic to Santana's sort of need to bond with Brandon, and I was kind of surprised when she just told Gina out of, without too much questioning, that Santana and Lionel were busy seeing Brandon, And that always surprised me about her, back in the early episodes last year when Santana was trying to see Brandon, and she seemed to actually, in many cases, go against what Santana was trying to do. So it's not inconsistent. I just find it sort of a puzzling choice she makes consistently. And
in the favor of CC over her family.
Yeah.
I think I thought Ruben had quit, in outrage over what CC had done, but she stayed. And actually in a few years something happens that Rosa sides with CC on, and I was just really angry at the time.
Yeah.
Why would she, once again, she's so loyal to CC, and this was a thing that would be, I guess, detrimental to her family that's coming up, or at least in my mind. And she just said, no, whatever.
Well, and what strikes me in this case is she's not actually even being loyal to CC in this. She's actually being loyal to Gina. And she doesn't even like Gina. So I don't really quite understand that.
Well, I guess I don't know if CC directly directed her not to listen to Gina, but I guess in her mind Gina's in charge of the house now. So she's taking orders from her. I don't know.
Yeah, it just, as I say, to me seems like a strange choice, and one that to me doesn't make Rosa much more appealing to me. Like I don't really relate to that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, I just wanted to just touch on the thing between Ted and Eden and Cruz. And I think Eden does make a sort of veiled, maybe not threat exactly, but close to a threat with Cruz, that maybe he needs to look away if he actually does find some evidence that Ted is lying, and which would be a redux of the whole Sophia situation. And I wonder if that is perhaps going to be a factor in their next breakup. That's what I'm anticipating.
Yeah, it'll either be Jack or Ted, or a weird combination, maybe.
And I also think that this is planting the seeds, perhaps, of some sort of conflict or maybe breach of trust between Eden and Ted when it is proven. I'm sure it will be proven at some point that Ted is actually lying. And the fact that he looked Eden in the eyes and said, no, I'm not lying. I don't think that'll sit well with Eden. And I also think it's really kind of interesting, as Ted's getting drawn farther and farther into this lie, that each step of the way, he's chosen to maintain this lie with Christy over his relationship with Lakin. And now he's choosing to maintain this lie over his relationship with his family. So he's kind of getting drawn closer and closer into Christy's orbit. And I'm curious to see where that's going to lead and how that's going to affect his relationships.
Like another thing that will come between them is, Eden promised Cece she wouldn't let him linger. I can't imagine Ted being on board with pulling the plug on Cece, right? So
yeah,
that I'm sure that'll be a massive argument at some point when Eden thinks, we should pull the plug or whatever.
And I'm also thinking that Ted obviously is making himself more and more vulnerable to, the his association with the murder. But I'm almost wondering if he's even making himself vulnerable to being charged with the murder itself. Because if he pisses off Christy, she could turn around and say, you know what, I didn't want to say anything, but it was actually Ted who shot him.
Well, I have no memory of how this storyline plays out, but I just can't imagine Ted going to jail, because he's a major character. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see how this plays out. As I said, the next thing I remember about Ted is he works at a radio station. I think that's next summer. So, no idea about like the next 10 months of Ted's storyline, really.
Yeah. I don't necessarily see it going that far either. I think maybe it may even just be there to sort of sow these little seeds of distrust and start the ball rolling on other things. But it is interesting how vulnerable it does actually make Ted, and how much it actually does break some of these relationships potentially.
Well, we'll see what the DA actually decides to charge them with. For a second I thought Felicia was just playing hardball but that, because at the end, facial expression-wise, she seemed to be softening up, but then when she told Cruz she thought they were lying, obviously she's going to report that back to Tony, the DA, so yeah, we'll see what if they decide to go forward. I mean, this is another trial when we're still waiting for 2 other trials to happen. The Maggie thing isn't really resolved, and now with Cece in a coma, that's kind of on pause, I think. And Sophia's trial could theoretically go ahead with Cece in the coma, really.
Yeah, actually, if you think of all the legal things we've got going on, we've got Sophia's trial, we've got Ben's case, we've got this thing with Ted and Christy, and then we've got all the potential legal shenanigans around Cece's papers, his will and his divorce.
I think if they really wanted to wrap up the Maggie thing, Warren and Mason just need to get together, and Mason says, well, I'm the attorney for Capwell, here's your check, and this one won't bounce,
Yeah, I feel like they had a golden opportunity to do that a few weeks ago,
yeah,
and then
it's bizarre
walked back
didn't do
from it, and maybe they were suddenly thinking, oh, we can do something else, and now they've kind of dropped it a little bit again. So.
I mean, Warren hasn't really done anything for a while, since he started a newspaper.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have a story, because his girlfriend lives in New York with her husband. And unless a big newspaper story, maybe wasn't it Christy who said she used to work on a newspaper? Someone a few months ago said, oh yeah, I used to work at the newspaper somewhere. And I thought, oh, this person is going to start working with Warren. I thought it was maybe Christy. Maybe it was Mary. But, yeah, that never went anywhere, and I don't even remember who it was now. So. All right, well, we had some credits this week, and there was no change. So everyone is still in the credits, even Theta. So I guess this is the first credits since her last appearance. So I think she's actually in the main cast, so she'll be in there till her contract runs out, even though we don't see her again. And then Dr. Biddles wasn't in the credits, which she was last time, but we had Felicia Dalton, which is Felicia Ayres Allen, but it says Felicia Allen Ayres, so one of us is wrong. And Brandon Capwell's Brandon Call is not in the main credits. He's in the, I don't know what that second section is called. He's not on contract, I guess. So, but eventually I expect he will be, since we know he sticks around for a long time as Brandon. And then I didn't write down who you thought was going to be leaving, but I think from memory you thought it might be Santana and Amy, right? Isn't that what you said?
Probably.
I went and looked at the exact dates, and it looks like only one person is leaving this week and one person is leaving next week, so it doesn't really change much. And a new cast member starts this week. So I seem to remember at the time, Entertainment Tonight doing a big story about it. It was a big stunt casting thing, because they were desperately trying to get viewers. So we'll see what you think when we meet the new character, if it would have drawn you into watching Santa Barbara had you seen all the hoopla around the casting. So we'll talk about that when they join. And we'll be back after we've watched episode 287 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Must be very hard for you having a husband who calls up other women, makes appointments to see them, without you knowing anything about it.
Must be very difficult living at the Catwells when you know no one there likes you.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 287 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Tuesday, September 10th, 1985. CC is wheeled into the atrium for a few hours as his room is being prepared. Presumably this is so that they can have a lot of scenes with CC and his family in the nice open air atrium instead of the crowded, presumably bedroom where they'll put him.
And I was actually very surprised that it was the actual actor lying on the gurney.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they would have, so many blankets and various bits of equipment that he would be obscured, and they would just probably have a stand-in for that,
Mm-hmm.
or even a mannequin. But no, it was actually Charles Bateman lying there.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes on soaps, when they put someone into a coma, it's because the actor's vacation time has come up, so they, have him go into a coma, and then they have, just an extra lying in there while the actor's out of town. But it looks like, it's only been a few days since Charles Bateman was last seen, so I guess Charles Bateman is not on vacation at this point. Gina has all of Sophia's things boxed up and put out on the lawn. And interestingly, Sophia at first suspects that Eden did that, but then they immediately realize it was Gina,
who's kind of giggling away in the background.
Mm-hmm. So Gina and Sophia argue about the usual things: who has the right to be there, who loves CC, who just wants his money, who, just wants, Brandon, who just whatever. So the usual stuff. But then Gina actually witnesses Sophia alone with CC, where she's begging CC to get better because she loves him, and Gina actually tears up. And obviously that this doesn't affect the fact that Gina wants some money or some status, but she does realize that Sophia loves CC. So she actually lets Sophia stay. Mm-hmm. But Sophia's response puts her back on Gina's bad side because she doesn't take it very graciously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We meet Kelly's new boss, and I think she called him Mr. Jenkins, who looks a bit like Dan Curtis, the creator of Dark Shadows, if I had to pick anyone at random that he looked like. And she tells him about Nick's book idea. She's very excited to team up with Nick to do that brother and sisters book. But Jenkins says he won't work with Nick. He's got a very bad reputation with publishers for missing deadlines and being flaky because of his PTSD, I guess. Mm-hmm. So Kelly manages to talk him into it by saying that Nick will work for free until he's proved himself, which is easy for a rich girl to say. A mysterious woman is watching Nick at the Orient Express, and all we see is her feet throughout the whole episode. But she ends up wandering around, the Orient Express quite a bit, and I think even later at the Capwell house she shows up. But we don't see her face, but I think we will see it in the next episode. The big stunt cast that I mentioned.
Oh, I keep forgetting about that. So I don't think that marketing would have worked well on me because you keep mentioning it and I keep forgetting it.
Mm-hmm. So Nick is meeting with Cruz at the Orient Express, among other things, and he tells Cruz that he needs money because he's actually putting his brother Dylan through medical school. So we find out that his brother is named Dylan. So I suspect we will be meeting Dylan eventually. The Hartley family will be, slowly brought in, I guess, like the Bassett family was. Hopefully with a better result for the Capwells. And he's literally paying for the whole thing, and he's actually got barely any money. So he asks Cruz, if he hears of any part-time PI or investigative jobs, that he would be willing to take them. And Cruz says he's always getting unsolicited requests from people, questions from people about, part-time PI work So he says he'll keep Nick in mind. Then Kelly shows up to tell Nick about the deal with Jenkins, which she's excited about, but he's horrified because he was counting on getting some money. He's now like having to work for free as well as not having any money. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have to say, I was surprised how hard he was pushing back on Kelly, considering he's, also been in love with her this whole time. So I found that kind of interesting. I did think, actually, Kelly raised a legitimate point that this would be a chance for him to actually regain some of his reputation. But obviously, that's not going to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm. And I think Kelly offered to give him some money, but he turned that down immediately. So. But he didn't go into the whole detail like he did with Cruz about that he's putting his brother Dylan through medical school. So, then later he apologizes to Kelly and says that he, I guess, overreacted a bit. He thanks her for getting the job and he gives her a thank you kiss, which she has an odd look on her face after that kiss. So I don't think she knows how to take that at this point. Augusta is livid to find that Brick canceled a real estate deal that she was in the process of making. She was going to buy some land for $1 million, and he says, I looked into that guy, and he's a crook. And she says, well, it's my money, and he said, well, no, makes us put me in charge of all the Lockridge money, and so you talk to her.
And I thought this was sort of funny because it's echoes of what we know about Augusta and Julia's family, how they were kind of shady people who had shady real estate deals. So.
Yeah, I wonder if this is going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Some historical real estate deal of their parents might come back to bite them, or we'll meet their parents. I don't know if they've talked about them, being alive or anything. So yeah, this will be interesting to see if this actually goes somewhere interesting.
And I also was really struck by the fact that Augusta kept saying, well, this is my money, but it's not really her money, it's the Lockridge money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Augusta decides to search Minx's room again. She goes through the desk, she finds the metal strongbox again, but this time it's locked. And then she goes through the dresser that we know has the secret panel in it, but she doesn't find the secret panel. And she thinks to herself, I'm going to need a professional to help me. Amy comes home for a visit. She tells Brick that Jade has offered babysitting for life, and Marissa has offered her room to the baby if she'll only agree to come back to Santa Barbara. But Amy is still largely leaning to moving to New Salem permanently, it looks like.
And I was really struck seeing Amy because they've really kind of glammed her up a little bit. She's got kind of diamond earrings and this big sort of satin dress. And, remember her from before. Of course, she was in a horrible maternity dress for so long, but she was always kind of plainly dressed in that. And I think they're really showing through her costume just how much more ostentatious the life in New Salem has been for her than it will be in Santa Barbara, perhaps.
And then she tells Brick that she had been expecting him to race to New Salem after his mother, got better, and to sweep her off her feet. So Brick seems flabbergasted by that. He did not think that she wanted that at all. But he does tell her that he's making good money now working for the Lockridges and that he can support baby Johnny well enough. They, of course, are having lunch at the Orient Express. Eden sabotages Cruz's ability to investigate Ted by turning off his alarm. That's how I read it anyway. It wasn't said. She just, had a different reason for it, but that's what I think. Later, Cruz finds Eric and Eden working on Capwell papers in his houseboat, and they, say, oh, we can't work at the Capwell house because Cece's there, and they're repainting Eden's office, and they're remodeling Jack's office, which is interesting to hear, because I guess they're on the ground floor, so they probably didn't have any remodeling after the fire. But
still, you'd think the Capwell Hotel would have a conference room or something where they could sit and work.
I mean, yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, some other space in the Capwell Hotel. So it's interesting that they're remodeling. I guess Jerry just moved in as is. You know, it was rented to Jerry as Jack by Cece, but now it will actually maybe reflect the high standards of the Jack Stanfield Lee law partnership. Or we never heard of Eric before. So has he moved to Santa Barbara as well?
We don't know. Don't know how long he'll be there.
So Cruz kind of tries reading the paper on the couch while they're, working away at the table. Then he goes outside for some peace and quiet. Eventually he comes in and just has to kick them out of the houseboat. He's had enough of them. So I think he found that very intrusive.
Well, if you think how small a houseboat is, too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are lots of rooms in the Capitol House. There's at least 2 living rooms, I think, that we know of. That's just downstairs. There's the study. That would be quiet, so... I don't know. Maybe even did it on purpose to bug Cruz.
I thought she was just doing it to irritate Cruz.
And maybe so did Eric, because he was really Jack when they wrote it.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, that would make more sense.
Jack has been needling Cruz, even though we never saw
sense.
it.
Yeah.
And Cruz gets a call from Augusta Lockridge saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a private investigator. Do you know anyone?" And Cruz says, "I've got just the guy for you." So now I think Nick will be working for Augusta. He'll be looking into, why Minx is so obsessed with Brick and his family, and maybe investigate some other things that, I think she's thinking there might be other secrets hidden somewhere in there. So she might think she might need some leverage against Augusta, or against Minx, for future, to let her get her own way for some future thing. So that's kind of that'll be a fun combination, Nick and Augusta, I think, that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and Nick versus Brick, because they were sort of allies before a little bit, where their paths crossed with the
against
faux
Jerry
Jack
Cooper,
thing.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean, I don't know if Brick will want to, or if Nick will want to take a job where he has to break into Minx's room and search it. That's kind of an interesting moral dilemma there. So we'll see exactly how Augusta frames it, or if she just has them do research for her based on documents she's found. But she didn't really find anything except that mass card. So
yeah, and I would think, his profession is as a photographer, so you could kind of see that dovetailing with PI work if it involved, following around cheating husbands or something like that. But I'm not sure if photography would play a big role in this. I don't know if he would really get much out of tracking Minx around.
Yeah. Maybe he'll take the opportunity to snap photos while he's tailing Minx. And that is pretty much it for a Tuesday episode. But we'll presumably see CC moved into his room, and it'll be no different than when he was in the hospital, I guess. One at a time, people will be filing in and talking to his unconscious form, and other people will be listening in at the door, perhaps. So I can see why the atrium is a little more conducive to that. Maybe they'll actually move him into one of those, like the living room instead, so it's adjacent to the atrium, and maybe there can be a little more flow happening there.
I imagine it will afford Gina a lot of opportunities to thwart his recovery as well.
Yeah, that's true, because she doesn't want him to wake up. So maybe if he does start to wake up, she can smother him with a pillow for a few minutes to put him back under or something.
Yeah, or mess about with his medication or his respirator or something. I'm sure we'll have...
Change the flow of the drip.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have a few false alarms with CC appearing to almost wake up and then be kind of put back under by Gina.
Yeah. Or Charles Bateman actually will go on a vacation, and there'll be a few weeks will go by when we just hear beeping from the next room, but we won't actually see them talking to CC, something like that too. I mean,
yeah, or they'll have conversations in the hall, apparently just coming out of his room or just getting ready to go into it or something like that.
Yeah, we'll see how many times we actually see Charles Bateman just lying there.
Yeah.
In the coming days, weeks, months. And that's it for this episode, I think. Do we think Amy's going to stay?
Well, she didn't seem like she was really that keen to stay to me.
Yeah, I guess
as I say with the costume and that, it's really, to me, making a statement that she would have a lot to give up if she moved to Santa Barbara. Although her family apparently is still there and enthused about having her back. I think maybe if she does stick around a little bit, it'll make kind of an interesting thing of Brick trying to win her back, and maybe especially in light of the conflicts he's having with Augusta and the whole Nick Hartley investigation, how that might play into it.
I mean, it might, whatever Nick finds, it may cause Brick to say, I'm okay, leaving town, I am going to move to New Salem with Amy.
Yeah.
Because he might not like what Nick discovers. So. All right. We will be back after we watched episode 288 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back to the world's only 50% vaccinated Santa Barbara podcast.
Hello.
We watched episode 288, which originally aired September 11th, 1985. And September 11th was my grandfather's birthday. So he died 2 days before his birthday. The mysterious woman sneaks into Nick's apartment and puts on some music while she changes clothes. Now this basically takes the entire episode. And each time we see her, the camera moves a little higher up. It starts on her feet, then we see legs, and then by the end of it, we see she has blonde hair. But when she turns around, she's always in shadow. So I don't know if we even saw her face in that final scene. I think we did, right?
We did see her face in the final scene, but it took us the whole episode to get there. And in fact, she had a line in the final scene.
Which we'll get to at the end of the...
But, yeah, and I mean, we even see at one point her full, front, but it's so far away, it's blurred, we can't quite see her face. So all through this, we're seeing little shadowy bits of her, and she's dancing around, and she goes and has a shower, and she comes back, and, it's all very seductive.
And somehow she thinks she can just waltz into Nick Hartley's apartment and do all this stuff. She puts on her own music, takes out the Bruce Springsteen tape and puts on her own music. Amy still has her doubts about marrying Brick. Now, this is another one of those episodes where everyone's at the Orient Express. Augusta runs into them and quizzes them about moving to New Salem. So she's got a running theme right now of getting her enemies taken out of town by their significant others, or by women. So she's hoping that Santana takes Brandon away, and she's hoping that Amy takes Brick away. At the Perkins house, Amy says she was homesick. Now, we don't see Marissa or Jade.
No.
But we see Brick. We haven't seen the Perkins house in a long time. I think, probably since Dr. Renfro was killed, or shortly after. And Amy says that she was homesick while she was in New Salem. So then Brick says, well, now that you're here, are you homesick for New Salem? So that's an interesting way to put it, to get her to really realize, well, maybe she would rather stay in Santa Barbara since she's not homesick for New Salem. Or if both, then Brick will have to try something else to get her to stay.
And this is one of those long scenes that it's always been something I've found personally quite irritating in soap operas, when they have these long love scenes and they're kissing each other and chattering away at each other at the same time. Because I don't find that sexy, and I don't find that a great way to carry on a conversation.
The worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Augusta calls Nick Hartley to hire him. And for some reason, I don't know if Augusta thinks of all the old detective shows she's ever seen and feels that since she's the woman hiring the detective, she needs to put on a sexy voice. But she seems to be doing this sultry voice every time she talks to Nick, either on the phone or in person. So it's kind of funny.
I thought she was doing it either to try and disguise her voice a little, although then she reveals herself. So that's probably not it. Or, Augusta loves her drama. I felt like this was maybe adding a bit of excitement to the whole situation for her.
Could be. So Julia has received her photos back from the place that prints the photos of her trip to New Staland. And Augusta says, "Oh, perfect. Do you have any of Brick in there?" And she borrows one of Brick and Amy that she can use for her package of documents to hand over to Nick. She's also got a bunch of other papers in there about the whatever she knows about the Wallace family, I guess. And she meets Nick and hands over this portfolio and says that she wants him to completely research Brick's family and to find any connection whatsoever to the Lockridges. And then when she gives him the check, he sees that she is Augusta Lockridge. And she says, "You have to keep that a secret." Santana tells Brandon she's not allowed to enter the Capwell house anymore. And Brandon suggests that Santana apologize to Gina. So, after all the time Cece has banned Santana from the house, Gina's actually succeeded in keeping her out. Julia meets with Augusta and Santana at the Orient Express to discuss whether Santana has any kind of case against Gina for Brandon. Julia asks Santana if Cece or Channing coerced her to give up Brandon, and she says she feels that they did. She also asks about the documents Santana signed, and Santana's a little bit cloudy on whether or not she actually did sign any documents. So I think this might be an important plot point.
I would have thought another potential argument they could use was the fact that Santana was quite young. I guess I don't know, sort of how the law works in California, but it just seemed to me she was still a teenager. So, I don't know.
In a way, with Cece being the boss of her parents, that's another level of power over her that he had.
Yeah.
So Julia thinks, they might be able to get before a judge and, and everything. But she says in the end, that the judge is really going to base it on who Brandon feels is his mother. And that's obviously Gina. Augusta spots Nick and Kelly at the next table. And she immediately thinks Nick has told Kelly everything. So she's quite distracted throughout this conversation as she keeps peering over there. And then when Kelly goes to the bathroom or something, she confronts Nick, and Nick says, "Of course I haven't told anyone, but the only thing that's going to make Kelly suspicious is if she sees you talking to me."
That's a good point.
Yep. So, Nick tells Kelly that she hasn't seen Dylan in 4 years, and that he is in his final year at a Caribbean medical school because he couldn't get in anywhere else.
Sounds dodgy.
Things are sounding dodgy for Dr. Dylan Hartley already here. But he tells her that he got the PI job, but he can't tell her anything about it. So he puts the check from Augusta in an envelope for his brother and addresses it. And when they go back to Nick's place, he puts it in the lobby for the building manager to mail. I guess that's the protocol in that building. So we see Nick's lobby for the first time. We see a bunch of row mailboxes that you'd expect in an apartment house. They go into Nick's place, and the mysterious woman hears them coming and jumps out the window. So they go in, and they start noticing things like, "Oh, my Bruce Springsteen tape isn't here, and there's a tape I've never heard before in the tape." So Kelly says, "Do you think someone broke in here?" And then later, while they're sitting on the sofa, Nick puts his hand over the thing and finds the bathrobe that the mysterious woman was wearing. So, I think he seems just a little bit confused by it, but I think he should put that together with the thought that someone has been in there.
Yeah, and I'm suspecting if he really thinks about it, he may have some ideas who it is, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, it would have to be someone who'd feel welcome just barging in.
Mm-hmm.
So then we see the mysterious woman take the letter out of the lobby, and then the next thing we know, she's at presumably the bar at the Orient Express, where she likes to hang out. And she looks at the address, and it says, Dr. Dylan Hartley. She says, that's a good one. If only they knew.
And we see her face.
And we see her face. And it's
I had no idea who it was.
March 1985, Playboy Playmate of the Month, Kathy Shower. That's exactly the look I thought you'd have on your face when I revealed the stunt casting that they jumped through hoops to get for Santa Barbara, to draw in people like you to watch it.
So as I was watching this episode and I saw this blonde woman, I was trying to think what kind of star it might be. Not, it would be maybe the wrong networks or whatever. But I thought maybe a comedy, kind of sexy comedy person like a Lonnie Anderson. And then I thought maybe like a prime time soap person, like a Morgan Fairchild or a Donna Dixon or even a Heather Locklear. And then I thought, well, maybe it would be like more of an action person. Now, Charlie's Angels would have been off the air, but there was like Jennifer O'Neill in Undercover at that time, maybe. Someone like that. And then I thought, well, maybe it would be more a pop culture person like Ivana White. Or I was going a little farther up the model scale and thinking of Christy Brinkley. But no, it was some person I didn't know.
Some person you've never heard of, either before or after.
Yeah.
So, even though this was a Wednesday show and I had classes on Wednesday, I have a feeling that I saw this episode. Because when I watched it, well, actually, let me ask you first. So what do you think is the secret of the mystery woman?
Well, I think she has something to do with Dylan.
All right. Well, that's
I guess
makes
that's
sense based on the final line.
Yeah, I thought maybe she was an old. At first, I thought maybe she was an old girlfriend of Nick's, or was someone who had known Dylan and known Nick through Dylan.
Well, I'll tell you what I thought in 1985. Nick hasn't seen Dylan in 4 years. Dylan's been taking money from him for 4 years, hasn't been going to medical school, but has been secretly having a sex change operation, and she is Dylan.
And I think that's an awesome, the reason why I hadn't guessed that is because it's 1985.
I almost feel like watching it again. I didn't actually remember that until I was writing up my summary, and then I remembered that that's what I thought back then.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's enough evidence in the episode we saw that the writers actually wanted people to think that. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I wonder if anyone else put that out to all our viewers.
Yeah,
if
no,
anyone else
I
thought that on first viewing, if that was something that entered their head, or that they thought that's where it was going.
I can definitely see that being where you could take it. I mean, it makes sense, especially like a little Caribbean university that, maybe would be the place to go for that kind of operation. And, it all adds up.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, I didn't go there myself because I thought, I don't think they would be having that conversation necessarily in 1985.
Well, Jody on Soap was getting a sex change operation in 78, 79.
That's true. That's true.
So, that is it for the episode. I guess we'll see if Nick and the mystery woman, who I've already revealed his name, Janice, will meet on Thursday's episode. And wonder how long it will be before we see Dylan. Assuming that's not already Dylan.
Yeah. I mean, it would be very exciting if that was Dylan.
And I don't really remember this relationship of the woman and Dylan. So, I'll be surprised all over again. I not be anything surprising. It may just be his girlfriend.
Yeah. So were there a lot of straight men watching Santa Barbara at that time?
I would say 2 out of every 79 viewers was a straight
I'm
male.
just thinking most women and most gay men wouldn't have recognized a calendar girl model.
Well, that's probably why they had to promo it on Entertainment Tonight so much. Yeah, that seems like an odd choice. I assume the network was somehow involved in that suggestion. So, because the ratings, it's been over a year now, and the ratings were, well, they weren't number one, let's say that. So, and well, that's it for the episode. But there's still one person leaving by the end of the week. So my favorite actor / character combination will be gone.
Amy.
We will see after we've watched episode 289 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 289 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Thursday, September 12th, 1985. And being a Thursday episode, I probably saw it, but I really had no memory of it. We forgot to mention the other day that Tawny Katane passed away yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago. She will be appearing as Lisa DiNapoli in a few years on Santa Barbara.
And it's interesting because when I was watching the last episode and trying to think of who this special guest star could be, I was thinking of people who had been in music videos as well as a possibility. And of course that Whitesnake video is a classic of that era. So.
Yep. And Norman Lloyd passed away today. Not Santa Barbara related, but we've been watching a lot of Alfred Hitchcock movies lately. And of course, St. Elsewhere. We are stuck on season 1 because I don't think they've released any further DVDs yet. Eden tries to sneak a look at the packet of evidence that shows up at Cruz's houseboat, but Cruz manages to stop her as she pulls out Steve's gun, which is wrapped in plastic. Eric arrives because Jack is busy. So I guess he's done with his work for Ronald Reagan, but he's busy today.
Yeah.
Eden says, "We hired Jack Lee because of his experience." But Eric says, "I've actually been the one that Jack's been consulting with on this since the beginning because I've got 10 years of experience in this kind of case." So, and thus endeth the Jack Lee references for the day. Eden tells Cruz that she does not want to see a repeat happen of what happened with her mother. Lakin tells Ted that Cruz wants her there when he questions Ted and Christy again. And they talk in the first half of the episode a lot about this questioning that's coming up, but we aren't actually privy to exactly what's going to happen until about halfway through. So Lakin tries to get Ted to tell her again what he and Christy are hiding, and talks again about how they have to be truthful with one another. And then, of course, Ted does not betray Christy's confidence, and Lakin basically tells Cruz she thinks Ted is hiding something.
It was really interesting to me in this episode how Lakin and Cruz are working together a bit more than Eden and Cruz are in this case.
Yeah, it was kind of came a bit out of nowhere that Cruz wants her there. It's similar to something else we saw recently, but I can't remember what now. Gina is interviewing new nurses for Cece, and Ted brings Mary over. We should point out that a thunderstorm has been raging since the beginning of the episode. So she hires Mary, because I think she wasn't too happy with some of the previous candidates, and says she has to live in, and she can sleep in Mason's old room. Which Mary finds kind of appealing, I feel.
Yeah.
Mary tells Eden that the machines are the only thing keeping Cece alive. I suspect this will be a plot point for
This is a bit of foreshadowing, I
some
think.
sort of decision by someone in the family that Cece's plug needs to be pulled.
Yes.
Although, I think in the last episode, Eden said to someone, maybe Cruz, that she didn't think she could do that. He needs to be given a chance to pull through. So that's interesting that Eden's, not 100% on board with following Cece's wishes immediately. During the storm, the power suddenly goes out, and Gina kind of panics. She's in the room with Mary and Cece, but Mary says nothing to worry about. She, waits for the backup battery to kick in. She said, "It's good that you sprang for the backup battery." So, and then after a little while, the regular power comes back on. So.
And we've actually had a taste of Gina's usefulness in Crisis with the whole thing with the tunnel caving in.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we had a previous reference to thunderstorms. Maybe that was Summer. Maybe it's the same traumatic event that Gina and Summer both are scared of lightning storms. But Gina was her old jumpy self this time. Gina falls asleep just as Mason calls, the call she's been waiting for. After 6 rings, Mary picks it up. And she's very happy to be talking to Mason, but Mason basically says he's not coming back, but he just wants to swing by and pick up some clothes, and asks her if she could pack up some of his things. And she says, "Oh, I really want to spend some time talking to you." And he says, "No, I don't have time for that, but meet me out by the gazebo." And she doesn't know where that is, so he tells her how to get there. So the next thing we see her trudging down the stairs with a heavy, I want to say valise-style case. Gina stops her, at first thinking it's Mary who's decided to quit and sneak out, but then realize it's Mason's suitcase. So, Mary's kind of stumbling and spluttering over her explanation this whole time. So we will see if she actually reveals to Gina that Mason's outside, or if she manages to just go outside, meet Mason, and hand him the suitcase, and then Mason's gone again. I don't know. Maybe he is on vacation somehow, and they've just, we just saw him on the phone call. Maybe they inserted that. Maybe he is doing a play, and they just cut a few scenes in that they shot earlier.
Yeah, it didn't sound like he was coming back anytime soon. But I guess that suitcase has to get to him somehow. But I think if Gina does suss out that she's bringing it to Mason, I think that will maybe further the little wedge we've already had just a little sense of that Gina might be sensing with Mary, because I don't think she wants competition for Mason. I was also just going to mention that we saw a little bit of Eden's tendency to be very non-welcoming to people when they first enter the Capwell home. With Mary, yeah. And, of course, when Mary is first there and first introduced as the nurse, and Eden comes in, and she's very gruff, and she's very skeptical that Mary is in any way capable of taking care of her dear father. But Mary really proves herself during the power outage. And Eden really comes around quite quickly to the idea of Mary being a very good addition to her father's medical team. And I think that's especially in contrast to Gina's reaction, which is basically hysterics. So it's kind of interesting to see this consistency in the character from the very first few episodes we saw of her. But it's also nice to see that Eden is capable of changing her mind when it's warranted as well.
I mean, Mary said, "I've been a nurse for 3 years, and I was in ICU for 2 or something like that." So. And I guess if Mason is going to be out of town, it gives Mary something to do with the other cast members while waiting for her main storyline of the love interest of Mason to get started, because otherwise Mary's just someone who lives in the same town as all the other characters, right?
Well, it did actually, another thing that I honestly had almost forgotten a little bit when I was watching this episode is, when you look at all the exchanges between Ted and Lakin about Christy and how Christy is no one and how Ted has to be there to stand with her. And of course, Mary is actually her sister, and that's almost kind of gotten washed away.
Yeah, it's true.
And that's
Christy and Julia arrive at the Bassett house where the interrogation is to take place. And we realize that, once again, Cruz is reenacting the night of the killing. It's not, quite as exciting as the killing of Channing, and certainly not as many people. But it seems, in some ways, a little more satisfying because everyone that's supposed to be there is there.
Yeah.
Unlike, Minx and Joe missing from the other one. So before Cruz arrives, Christy tells Julia she's worried that she'll say the wrong thing because of the weird, surroundings. When Ted, Cruz, and Eric arrive, Cruz asks them to show him how it happened. And they basically go through all the events. But then Cruz sort of stops them regarding the events of the gun dropping. And Ted says that Steve, that Christy shot him. He dropped the gun and then he fell. And, of course, we all know he staggered back a little bit and didn't fall near the gun. Well, after a few more direct questions about that, Cruz basically catches them in a lie because he says, the gun was brand new, and there are no scratches on it to indicate it's been dropped, and there are no dents in the floor. And then Eric says the same thing that I was thinking. Oh, Ted should just say it bounced off Steve's shoe. Eric says, oh, it could quite possibly have hit his shoe and therefore not dented the floor. Cruz says, that seems very far-fetched. But I thought of that and I tested the shoe and there's no scrape marks on it at all. They were brand new, newly shined shoes. So, basically Cruz says, I think you're lying. Ted and Christy stick to their story. And Cruz says, well, as soon as I walk up that door, I have to tell the DA. So you make the decision. And it ends with them not changing the story. And as they're leaving, Lakin says to Cruz, let me stay behind with Ted and see if I can get him to tell me. Now, the weird thing is, presumably he's talking about the Ventura DA, right? I mean, the district attorney is related to a city, isn't it? I wouldn't think that Ventura and Santa Barbara would have the same DA. So that also makes me wonder, why is Cruz being allowed to investigate this whole Ventura thing? So, a little bit dodgy, I think. Maybe the Capwells pulled some strings with some higher-ups in each city. So Cruz and Eric and Christy leave, and
I guess Julia leaves too.
And Julia leaves. Yeah. And then Lakin says to Ted that she would have done the same thing as Christy if she were in her shoes. Trying to get Ted to open up and say, yeah, Christy just shot him. But Ted says, you don't know what you're talking about. And at one point he says, I don't want Christy to go to jail for 20 years. And Lakin says, 20 years. And Ted says, yeah, that's what Steve said. And then Lakin thought, Steve, when did he say that? Before or after he was shot? And then Ted says, I can't tell you. Lakin says, then it's over between us.
Yeah.
If we can't trust each other, I guess we don't have much going for us. And she leaves. I don't know if this is just a ploy to get him to tell the truth, or if this is really another trough in their up and down relationship.
I thought, well, I assumed it was another trough. I mean, it could be a clever ploy, but I also thought that him mentioning that to her, if she was called as a witness, she would have to testify to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear why he doesn't want her involved, in addition to, promising it to Christy, but also that it would put her as a potential, co-conspirator after the fact. So he really is trying to protect Lakin as much as Christy by not telling her. So.
But I mean, even what he's revealed, just in that little conversation, she could testify to. And that would be, she found it incriminating, I think, if there was they already know that Christy shot him. I do think actually Lakin made a good point that, Christie's actions on their own are actually sympathetic because people know her history with Steve now, and that was really a terrible situation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in some ways, I think Ted being mixed up in it actually complicates that narrative a little bit.
Yeah. So after Lakin leaves, Ted sort of hems and haws a bit to himself and then says, yeah, I guess Lakin's right, and runs after her. So will he come clean to Cruz about exactly what happened? I have no memory of how this resolves, so we will see after we watch episode 290 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
It's Friday, September 13th, 1985. It's my mom's birthday. And Calculus 3, we are learning volumes of solids of revolution. So you have a solid, and you revolve it around an axis, and you calculate the volume inscribed in space by that solid. It's a little more complex than pi r squared. I'm going to look into the drop deadline for Calculus 3, I think. Episode 290 of Santa Barbara finishes out our week. Augusta phones Jade to see if she knows where Brick is so that he can help find Lakin.
Mm-hmm.
The doorbell rings. Ted shows up, and Augusta is furious with Ted. She's read this note that Lakin has left for him that says she's breaking up with him, and no one can find her. We actually get a voiceover only of Lakin in this episode, reading the note. We don't actually see her in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Ted tells her he's decided not to keep secrets from Lakin any longer, but Augusta kind of tells him that she thinks it's all for the best that they're broken up. Ted and Augusta call around to all of Lakin's friends, and we hear a name of a person that we've never heard of before, Margaret or something. No one knows where Lakin is. Then Christy shows up, saying, "Oh, I thought you'd be here." And she has been talking to Mary, and has apparently off camera told Mary the whole truth about everything, and has told Mary that she plans to go to the police. So she says the same thing to Ted, and then Ted says, "Oh, that's exactly what I was going to tell you." So it seems like Ted and Christy are going to go to the police now. If I were them, I'd go to Cruz, because he's kind of friendly. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, this makes me wonder if, this storyline will kind of peter out, and if it was just a way to have Lakin go missing and everyone be very concerned, and, a sort of Lakin is missing storyline. Or if, there'll be another part to this, because I would think they would probably, there would have to be some kind of repercussions for Christy killing Steve. So see where it goes.
Yeah, as I said, I have no memory of how this plays out, so it'll be an interesting few months, I guess, until next summer, when it's teen scene summertime fun time again. Summer wasn't as fun as last summer. Gina asks Mary why she has Mason's suitcase. And Mary says, "Oh, I was bringing some of his stuff to his apartment so that when he comes home he'll have something." That's her quick thinking. I guess Gina kind of buys it. But Gina says, "Don't bother, Mason's moving back into the house when he comes back." And then she kind of remembers that brief moment I think she saw between Mary and Mason, and brings that up in order to try and nip anything in the bud. She says, "Oh, I thought maybe for a second that you had an interest in Mason, but considering where you've been for the last few years, he's trouble enough for someone who's been around, let alone someone who's never." So Mary meets Mason at the gazebo and says, "Sorry I couldn't bring your suitcase. Gina took it." But they have a nice long talk, and they sing songs together. Mason's drunk, I should point out. And they're just about to kiss when Gina waltzes in and says, "Aha, I knew you were lying, that you were hiding Mason." And Mason says, oh, I swore to secrecy. So she reveals to Mason that the papers have gone missing and that he can move back in. He says, Eden and Jack searched my room and they didn't find them. She, of course, wants to go to bed with him immediately, but he says he's tired and he actually would rather spend the night back at Sally's apartment to get his head together before he returns. Mm-hmm. So both Gina and Mary end up having fantasy sequences about being with Mason in the Capwell atrium and him, being their romantic partner.
And this actually reminds me way, way back. I think it was maybe even the first week or two of Santa Barbara where we saw that great fantasy sequence that Mason was having about Santana. So it seems like Mason ends up in a lot of fantasy sequences, both his own and other people's.
So this is, of course, now nighttime. Everyone's gone to bed, and Mason shows up again. He decides, wait a minute, why am I should be returning triumphantly. I should be taking over my rightful place in the throne. He decides he's gone to sleep in his old room, not realizing that Mary has been moved in there. And Mary's asleep. He gets into bed, realizes someone's there, assumes it's Gina, and says, oh, I told you I'm not up for tonight, and promptly falls asleep.
I knew there was going to be trouble when Gina assigned Mary Mason's old room. You just knew that.
Hijinks. Suddenly a very interesting triangle between Gina, Mary, and Mason.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if Mason tries to just shut Gina down and, say, well, I'm interested in Mary. If Gina says, those papers might just get found if you don't sleep with me.
Yeah, I would think either of those things could happen. I guess my only thought would be, right now Gina's really got to play the card that she is Cece's wife and the sort of woman of the household. So I do wonder just how far she can push her pursuit of Mason while still making that claim. I guess she's really just going on the legal side of things, that it doesn't really matter what she does as long as the papers aren't there. Mm-hmm. But
well, it'd be an interesting parallel from they initially slept together because Mason wanted her to sign some documents, and that was, Mason coercing her, and now she'll be coercing him because she has some signed documents. Yeah. So it would be a good, way to close that loop.
I imagine this will antagonize things between Mason and Gina and the other Capwell children as well. So they'll just lead to all sorts of upheaval, I'm sure. I'm sure Sophia won't be thrilled about it either.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting how much sneaking around is done and how much is in the open.
Yes, and with Santana starting to explore legal options for taking Brandon, that could perhaps provide her with some opportunities as well, if Gina's particularly reckless.
This could be a Julia versus Mason scenario, because Julia is clearly the lawyer of choice for Santana. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nick comes to the Lockridge house to give Augusta an initial report on his findings. And Augusta is horrified to learn that he knows Brick, because they greet each other heartily. And then Nick says they've only met a couple of times and it won't affect his ability to do the job. So Augusta's suspecting everyone of secretly conspiring with Nick. Augusta then says, well, you should use your friendship with Brick to learn more, which Nick is quite hesitant about. Augusta's pretty, insistent about that. Although, surprisingly later, Brick shows up and says to Nick, hey, do you do any private investigating? Because I'd like you to look into Minx Lockridge. She showed up while I was racing cars in Nevada and took me in as a chauffeur, and now I'm running her real estate holdings. So I'd like to find out exactly what her interest in me is.
So ironically, Brick and Augusta basically hire Nick to do the same job. Mm-hmm. This gives Nick a wonderful opportunity to get sort of twice the fee for the same work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although he just seemed to be indicating that he won't charge Brick initially because he's not entirely sure he's going to take the case, but he'll do some initial investigating. So this could be kind of funny.
Yeah, this could be quite interesting.
More or less a humorous storyline, is what I'm thinking.
It definitely seems to be playing out that way, although I would very much like to hear more about Minx's interest in Brick, and I'd like to hear the story of why she's so interested in him.
Mm-hmm. So I think Nick said he's already talked to Brick's mother and hasn't really gotten anything surprising from her. So. The mystery woman is jazzercising in Nick's apartment. Once again has to quickly turn off the TV and hide when Nick and Kelly come home, briefly. I think they come home with a pizza at one point. I think it's a pizza. But Kelly also has a bunch of stuff from her first editorial assignment, or her second one, which is to test an instructional guide for ballroom dancing. So she's got a record and the book, and she's got a vinyl thing that unfolds that she lies on the floor with life-size footsteps cut out or painted on them. So Nick and Kelly dance to try out the thing, and they end up giving up on the painted footsteps and just dance together. Then Nick gets a call for another job. He's got to race out to the airport to meet a plane to get some photos. Kelly leaves too, and so the mystery woman comes back out, and she starts dancing to the record and gives up on the footprints too, I think.
Yeah, I think she chooses really interesting activities for, sneaking into a house. She's showered, she's jazzercised, she's putting on music and dancing, and when you think about it, none of those are really easy activities to just quickly pack away and hide. So we're seeing that she's someone who likes to take chances.
Mm-hmm. So then she decides to take a shower.
Again.
It's another shower. And comes out in a towel, and Nick comes home, and she quickly runs to hide in the darkroom, and her towel snags on what I'm guessing is more wicker, because that's very snaggy in my opinion. And so the towel ends up being left behind. Nick comes in, finds the towel, and I guess sees a trail of water to the darkroom, and opens the door, and she says, "Hi, Nick! Sorry about exposing your film, but it was either that or me." She's holding a bunch of stuff in front of her. I didn't really see what it was, but I wonder if it was a bunch of film.
Yeah, we'd have to take a closer look at it.
I
She's
think
grabbed something.
Re-see that scene probably on Monday's episode. So that was the big cliffhanger.
Yeah, actually, I kind of thought was that the cliffhanger or Mason getting into bed with Mary?
Let's see what the final scene was. Mason enters, goes into the bathroom. Mary's asleep. Mason comes out of the bathroom and gets into bed. Thinks it's Gina. "Later, please," he says, and falls asleep. Yeah. So it's the Nick scene was the second last scene. But still, yeah, I mean, not a life. I mean, not really cliffhanger, because I assume it's going to be one of those things where Mason wakes up in the morning and Mary wakes up, and they don't see each other at first. So I think it'll be the Nick thing that we'll pick up on, because that's obviously got to be continued. And can't imagine that scene jumping to the next morning.
Yeah, I don't know, because every once in a while they'll throw you a curveball, and it might be Cruz and Eden or something. So we'll see.
And Ted knocks on the door of the houseboat. Well, that is it for week 59. So we will be back in 2 weeks for week 60 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Sorry about exposing your film, but it was either that or me.